there a medico there? What about policies? What about working with children's checks? Those stuff. That is all changing. So I've been delighted at seeing the amazing progress, and also it's also important to highlight that the Jewish world, as David was alluding to before as well, the Jewish world really was looking at Australia, in particular the Royal Commission, and therefore once we got their attention, they got to see what was going on there here, both the negatives and the positives. So people have been looking here to, as Victorians, as leaders here, so things have been implemented in their local communities, replicating to some degree some of the advances and the developments that we've seen here. So whether we're talking about the Yeshiva Centre in particular, I've seen many wonderful positive developments there. I've seen positive developments everywhere in our community, but at the same time we still have a very long way to go. I mean, we're still hearing victims are feeling intimidated, whether in Yeshiva, that's the only place I've heard of in recent times, they still feel that way. So we still have a long way to go in terms of changing the culture. I won't focus on a lot of the stuff is in the book, but I am overall delighted to see the progress. We're certainly a long way forward from where we were back 5 years ago when this whole public campaign started. And that certainly has made the process much easier. It's difficult with some of the issues of being today, the intimidation and the like. Hearing the positive feedback, victims coming up to me and saying, or even their therapists have come to me on their behalf, they've gone to seek redress, they've gone to therapy for the first time because they heard my story. So, if I was able to assist in some way, those types of things, that's really made me feel empowered and has given me the energy to continue in this difficult battle.
So policies and procedures and regulations are one thing, but people's beliefs, their attitudes are another, particularly the leadership that have been very hostile to you. And it's very hard to change what's in people's hearts. But I think there's one person in particular who you felt has really moved a long way in a personal sense as well as a leadership sense, and that's Rabbi Glick, former principal at the school. Tell us about what you mean by that.
I don't think that we actually end up going into too much detail about that aspect of it in the book, how much I actually have grown my respect of Rabbi Glick. But he is someone who I felt is genuinely sorry for what's happened. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything he's said and done, and he knows that. I've told him that I still find hard to believe some of his evidence at the Royal Commission, so he is no saint. But in terms of turning the situation around, taking responsibility, resigning from his positions. I had lunch with Rabbi Glick, and not only that, for the book, we actually wanted to insert a certain section in there which somewhat contradicted the legal settlement we had in the defamation case. And of course, our lawyers weren't going to agree to publish that unless we got him, his views on that. And I sent it to him, and I said to him, Rabbi Glick, I really would like to set the record straight about what happened between you and I, and this is what I wanted to put out there and explain my position. And to his credit, besides from very minor changes, he agreed to that. And it's not just that, it's also on an ongoing basis. I mean, there was that Yeshiva public event where he came and he spoke. So I must say, out of the entire leadership, Rabbi Glick is someone I think he's got the power for me to have greater influence in the Yeshiva community. While he's still an old leader, so he's from the old guard and no longer holding a leadership position there, I still think he has the capacity to influence within that community because he's well respected. And I really hope that him and others continue that positive trajectory.
All right, well, look, before we move to a Q&A session with the audience, there's one last area that I want to talk to you about. It's not an easy one, and it's about the personal toll that not just the last 5 years, but many more years have taken on you. I think the popular view about you is you're a very articulate speaker, you're confident, you hardly and ah at all when you talk. You seem to grasp your words and ideas very clearly. You seem to be an unstoppable force, a bit of a verbal battering ram who's ready to take on anybody over anything that they've got wrong and said inappropriate things about. And even tonight, after all of this, you appear as the sort of consummate advocate But I think in a way you bring a disservice to yourself by being so articulate, because people see you as someone up here who has not suffered like the thousands of other people whose lives have been ruined, people who've killed themselves, people who are traumatised beyond competent life. You seem a million miles away from that, sitting here and being on television over the past 5 years. Yet, that's not a front, that's who you are, but I know from our discussions, as do some of the people here, just what sort of a toll this has taken on you as a person, and in terms of your daily life, your family life, your extended family, and all of the conflict that has grown and had to be negotiated between all those stakeholders. I'd like you now to tell us a little bit about what the toll has been.
One of the reasons I did want to come out back in 2011 or whatever it is, I wanted to share my story in the media, was because I felt that the perception out there was that if you were being sexually abused, you're at the gutters, you're unable to have a family, hold down a job, on drugs, all those kind of things that are all too common for those who were sexually abused as children. So I felt that I had a contribution to make in actually showing that there are the statistics of 1 in 5, those who are aware of them in Australia and Israel and America, the same statistics. 1 in 5 children before the age of 18 experience some form of sexual abuse. 20% of the population. Department of Justice in the US, here it's CASA, and in Israel it's the official agency there that has those figures. So, if I look in this room, it's safe to assume there's, at least 5 or 10 people who are sexually abused here as well. 5 or 6 years later, I must say that it has been a challenge, and my life was always a challenge in many ways. I've had the flashbacks, I've had nightmares about the abuse, I've lived with it. Talk about the book, substance issues and the like. But in the last few years in particular, there's, I guess, the added burden on top of my own trauma, the abuse that I suffered. When I hear countless, hundreds of stories of victims of abuse, of their own experiences, all those things stay with you. And exacerbates the trauma, the vicarious trauma they call it. So when people do see me, I have my professional mannerism and approach and my work, but then I am who I am. There's the person who wakes up every morning with those stories and goes to sleep with those stories. And in the last few years in particular, I must say, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, to levels where difficulty breathing, waking up in the morning, not wanting to get out of bed, or wanting to get out of bed but unable to get out of bed. Got 3 kids I need to deal with, got work I need to do, but there's a sense of paralysis in bed, just lying down, unable to continue. Driving, suddenly on the side of the road I have to pull over, just tears streaming down and just having to wait on the side of the road till the anxiety passes. Waking up with suicide ideation, wanting to be dead. Day in months, day in, day out, most of the day thinking about those things. Wanting to be dead, thinking about how I would do it, and then stopping myself from thinking it because I know I can't do it because I've got 3 kids. And that's how I often think, the 3 kids are the ones keeping me alive. That's the feeling I've had sometimes. But thankfully, I must say, in the last half year, I've been seeing therapy for the first time properly. I've seen therapists over the years, and I guess that's probably a mistake. Part of it, a lot of it has to do with the fact of growing up in an environment which doesn't necessarily encourage going to therapy or taking medication, because if you do those things, you're weak, you're crazy, those types. That's the kind of attitude that I grew up with anyway. Things may have changed. So then acknowledging that those things would be helpful was a difficult barrier to overcome. But I guess in some ways for me, I've had to make a decision in my mind, and I don't know necessarily have made a decision yet, a final decision, but at least until now it has. I can go two ways. One is focus on me, my family, my kids, or focus on the community. Because I don't know that both can be done simultaneously in this area. Of course my children will gain from whatever it is I'm trying to do for the community, but continuing this role for the community does come at the expense of my family. There is no question about that. And unfortunately, sometimes I say I'm unable to put my family first, and I know that I probably should. So, without going into any great detail about some of the family circumstances, I do know that, as you can imagine, there's more than one victim here. Not just the person who was sexually abused, but the extended family, obviously also the pedophile's family, his children who often didn't do anything wrong, but focusing on this and my circumstances for a moment, that's what it is. Day in, day out, it doesn't matter how successful a person is, it doesn't matter